Porgy and Bess, for the past 30 to 40 years, has mostly been produced in large opera houses in the United States. So these are opera houses that have 100-piece orchestras, that have 100-member casts, a huge chorus on an epic scale. And obviously we have a much more intimate space. So the first change we'll be doing is reducing the opera. We'll have a cast of 14. We'll have an orchestra of only 6 pieces, and we'll be doing what we do with every opera and musical that we produce here, which is focus on the story and the character, and try and give people a version of the theater piece that they've never seen before, and allow them to hear lyrics, and allow them to see story situations that they would otherwise miss seeing it in a large house.
Explain the time frame and the setting and the travails that Porgy and Bess go through.
Well, the opera is based on a novel that was written in the 1920s by a Southern writer named DuBose Hayward. He was a white Southerner. And he wrote Porgy because he wanted to write a story about all these African-American dock workers and cotton pickers and working class members who he would see in Charleston of his day, and who he really grew up around. And so he wrote this story, Porgy, about a man named Porgy who is disabled and who is a beggar. It's actually based on a man that DuBose would see every day walking to work in the streets. And the story is about Porgy falling in love with a woman named Bess, who is an itinerant woman, goes from place to place, hangs out with lowlifes, occasionally drinks and does drugs pretty hard. And the central tension of the story is whether or not Bess is going to run away to her essentially ex-boyfriend, Crown, or whether she's going to stay with Porgy.
So the opera really was groundbreaking when it was first introduced. How was it received then?
It was wildly successful when it first came out. It had a very successful first run on Broadway, and then it toured all over the country. The critics were mostly divided when it first came out. Everyone unquestionably recognized that George Gershwin had accomplished something remarkable with his opera Porgy and Bess, and there were such high expectations about this being the first great American opera that people were naturally conflicted over what they felt about it. At the beginning, a lot of the debate was over whether this was a real opera or not, or whether it was a music theater piece. And it's only been in the last 30 to 40 years that opera houses have taken a second look at Porgy and Bess and said, wait, no, this is incredible music, incredibly complex music, and this is an opera, and it should be served as an opera.
By court theater producing it, how do you enter that debate?
We're actually coming into the scene after a period where most people have seen Porgy and Bess strictly in opera houses. And so we think that it's time for a version of the piece that is smaller and that goes back to sort of the original intentions of the storytellers to reintroduce that story on a smaller scale.
While the opera was groundbreaking initially, it's also been criticized as racially insensitive to African Americans today. How does court deal with that?
We're highly aware of that criticism. And what we're going to do is mostly emphasize those original intentions of the storytellers, because the original intention was to provide a sympathetic portrait of these working class black Southerners in Charleston at the time. Now, at the same time, you can't get away from the fact that the novel, the opera, was composed by white artists writing about black artists. And for its early history, all of the writers and producers were white, and white artists were the ones who benefited and made money off of this opera. Now, obviously, our society has changed. We're post-civil rights era, and we're just living in a different society. And so we think it's time now that we can go back to this opera and take a look at it and say, you know what, something really good was happening here. Like, this opera really does care for these characters, and it presents them in a three-dimensional way as real people, as sympathetic people. And we think that we can get back to that original version that the creators intended.
Thank you very much. It sounds exciting.
And thank you. We're very excited for it.